Great. Hi. So my name is Oskar Micheletti from the winery Dr. Bürklin-Wolf. Nice being here with you tonight, talking about vintage 2021. First of all, I'm going to tell you where we are. So we are situated in the region Pfalz, in the southwestern part of Germany, close to the border to France. We are actually, the Pfalz region extends for almost 80 kilometers from the north direction south. And as I said, in the south, there's the border to France. Next to the hills, that's the northern part of the Vosges, and almost on the border of the Rhine Rift Valley. This was an antique sea, so that's why on the border here in the towns where we produce our wines, you have a high and very strong variation of soils and a very interesting geology. We are in the central part of the Pfalz region called the Mittelhart, and the four towns where we produce our wines called Rupertsberg, Deidesheim, Forst, and Wachenheim. That's where situated our winery. Have, as I said, very interesting soils for producing dry and outstanding Riesling. Since 1597, the winery is situated in Wachenheim. That was when the very first Bürklin started to produce, to make wine, start to make some winemaking. And it's still today a family-owned and family-led winery, today led by Bettina Bürklin von Guratze. And another important thing to say to present our winery is that still today we produce 100% of estate bottled wines. Means that all of our wines are produced from our own grapes, from our own vineyards. And all of these wines, so 100% of our surface is certified biodynamic today. To explain a little bit better where we are and talking a little bit more about the geology, is that these soils where our vineyards are, so the main geology that you find is the red sandstone, yellow sandstone. But the most important vineyards that we have on these slightly slopes underneath the Pfälzer Wald, the forest of the Pfalz, have also some volcanic soils like basalt, or you can find some clay in the town of Rupertsberg, or some löss or limestone in Deidesheim. Let me tell you some things about the vintage 2021, which was actually, let's call it again a tricky vintage, but as far as I remember, all the vintages in the last years have been tricky, but this one was a little bit particular in another way. 2020, 2019, 2018, those have all been warm, dry, and sunny years. And now with 2021, we had finally, let's say in this way, finally again, a rainy year. It makes it a challenging year, but 2021 was also a good year because we finally had again some little bit of rain after these 3 very dry years. This was in particularly also good for generally farming areas like the Pfalz, southern Germany, but also the German forests, because it was very, very dry the last year. So nature generally suffered. But of course, all this rain makes it a challenging year. So also a cooler year with a later bud break, with later flowering, with an intensive canopy management during the season, with very precise and very punctual soil management that you have to manage in a different way than in the other years. And then, of course, harvest, that with a later harvest, cooler harvest, also again, rainy harvest, this was quite challenging at the end. So that's why I can say, before I talk about the wines, we are quite happy those days now that we can taste the wines again and see how good the result at the end were with all this effort that we put into the work. So coming back on the vegetation season, generally in this part of Germany, rain comes outside of the vegetation period. So generally you get it in the very early spring or right after harvest. It makes it quite difficult then to plan your work that over the year, because you have to keep humidity in some way in the soil. So what happened this year is that we got so much rain. To make an example, so in June, we had almost 25% of the whole rain that came all over the year. And to this was, I checked the data before, so this was the most rainiest month in the last 8 years. And that was exactly that moment when you have flowering, when all the nature starts to grow again. And that what's happening is that it's challenging way then to work in the vineyards and to treat them the right way. But we managed it in some way. Let's say the results have been good. So we had a good, at the end, a good flowering. We could see that on a quite, let's say, a normal yield that we have for our average. And harvest started then in quite late, almost 3 weeks after 2020 and 2019, so around the 13th of September. And yeah, almost 5 weeks of harvest ended then around, I think the last day of harvest was the 18th or the 19th of October, which was quite late compared to the last years. Higher acidities, lower in alcohol. This is something that we like it, but you need to have a good balance in the vineyard to produce wines out of a situation like this. And almost, I mean, I talked to the winemaker Nicola yesterday when we tried a few wines, and he said now finally he sees the results of the decision he took like 3 months ago when he was outside the vineyards. I think we never saw him during harvest spending so much time in the vineyards and not in the cellar, because this is a year where we really have to go outside, taste the grapes, look how the vineyard is looking like, and deciding what you're doing. And the most challenging part for Jan, our vineyard manager, was that he said, we spent almost 2 weeks in the vineyards to do a pre-harvest. So you see, when the ripening goes on only in a very slow way, you have to help to the wines, you have to help the plant to give a good ripening to the grapes. So in some vineyards, we cut down out only 10%, some other vineyards, almost 30 to 40% of the grapes, that the remaining grapes could ripen a very well way. That was quite a challenge for the picking team, because you see some years like 2020, 19, when all the grapes are healthy, they're ripe, they're looking fantastic, they're almost yellow shining, and you just run through and you cut grapes, you pick them, and you're happy. This year, you have to focus on every grape. You sometimes have to turn it around, say, no, not this one, the other one. And so the picking team was quite tired at the end of harvest. You could see that, but they did a great job. They did a great job. The wines now, it's still early. With a late harvest, you see then they start later to come into fermentation. We do as much as we can spontaneous fermentation. It's working very well. This was more challenging year because they enter with the almost very cold. So the grapes are cold, the juice is cold, and also the cellar is cold in the later part of October and then November. So the spontaneous fermentation suffers a little bit. It turns out into a longer fermentation. So, but now almost all the wines are dry in cellar. But this very first moment after the fermentation needs to find this balance. So these wines are, you can understand the structure and the quality what they have, but it's still not balanced wine. So we talked about that maybe this year we're going to start to release the wines in March or maybe April. For now, we still happy that we can give to our clients some wines from 2020 that is showing very nice now. And but you see, 2021 will have it's has a high potential. If we can compare it to another vintage, I would say right now in this moment 13 with this high acidity. That was also a year where a lot of people here realized, oh wow, okay, how should we handle with all this acidity? But the people who had a balanced yield already at that time, if you try now 13, they are fantastically balanced wines. And so when you think back on 13 now and see now 21, you're actually happy and see, okay, if this goes into that direction, we are lucky and happy. So from our side, this was a little bit a small report of 2021. Let's say to conclude, with this challenging year, I don't want to go too far with this because there have been other areas in Germany where it was much more difficult. I mean, when we think about our friends and the other wineries in to rebuild and everything. But it was again a kind of a wake-up call also for us here in this area, that we, even with that, what we do every day, we have to do something to at least break down a little bit climate change. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Oskar.